USB micing it up.
Nice. Hello, and welcome to Khyber Shards, a 5th edition actual play set in the Eberron campaign world. It is Friday, and so we have another KSA today, where we're going to take some questions from our viewers. If you've seen the most recent episode, surprising no one, we are being joined by RA, the player of Esri. If you haven't seen the most recent episode, this will spoil it. So I strongly recommend turning this video off. Go watch the most recent episode before you get into this, because
what is the most recent episode? 65.
65, yeah, episode 65, The Lost Mark. Yeah, so this was a dramatic episode, and not exactly for the reasons one might expect. One of the questions that made me crack up on the YouTube was, how is Esri enjoying Shade's quest? Because this really did start out as very much a let's do Shade's personal quest, and then we ran into a scheduling conflict that required that Ari get pulled out, and so it became a little bit of Ari's personal quest, and then we had this happen that became a little bit about Esri's personal things.
So I mean, this was the biggest lore drop of Esri's character so far.
Yeah. So I guess, obviously that question is in jest, but
my favorite answer to questions like that comes from Jerry Seinfeld. I don't know, 0, none, whatever the scale is. He's not enjoying it. Is that clear enough?
I'm curious, do you think, and maybe you don't want to answer this, maybe this is going to come out when we necessarily deal with these things over the next several episodes. Do you think this is the sort of thing that Esri places blame on anyone for, in the sense of, you guys dragged me out into this place and then this happened? Does Esri see this, considering how it wound up, does Esri see it as a bad thing? Or is this this was the price of knowledge?
Yeah, definitely not like this is the price. He's not like gonna see a silver lining here in that way. That's not his nature.
Right.
Does he blame anyone? Yes, in the way that he always blames them for being foolish. But he also, we've covered this. It's been covered plenty at this point. Like he's chosen to go along. He does not.
Mm-hmm.
He thinks that these things are foolish. But he's accepted that. So it is absolutely yeah. It's this, of course.
Right.
What else would happen? Like this is how it was always going to be. But he's also made.
I knew it would end this way.
Yeah, I didn't know it would end this way, but you know, if we're grouping up ends well, ends not well, he's firmly in it's going to be in these options over here, the not well options. So, and well, he didn't learn anything. He learned some things that are maybe beneficial in the sense that he knows them now, but he didn't learn anything that made him happier or
fair.
Doesn't make him look forward to life more than previous. It wasn't like it wasn't like, oh, you're not nearly as cursed as you thought you were. It's completely the other side of it. Oh no, it's way worse. So much worse.
Yeah, there's a certain ignorance. Ignorance has been bliss to Esri. It will be interesting to see how that. I will be interested to see how that affects Esri going forward, as Esri has always been the most risk averse of the group, and now Esri realizes that there are multiple angles of significant danger to himself, and I'll be interested to see how that impacts his going forward. And yeah, so we have unsurprisingly, numerous questions that almost all deal with the big event of the most recent episode. So we'll get into that. Mia, who remained after the watch party until she came up with a question. Mia says, it sounded like there could have been an opportunity for you to stay in the alternate plane while staying in the campaign. The conversation with Arondis was amazing, but agonizingly long, waiting to know what you would do. Were you always planning to say yes to returning to the gang, or were you genuinely working out whether you wanted to remain a spirit?
That is quite the question. So let's see. Separating player and character in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
As a player, it was, yeah, if you're offering the chance for resurrection, I was gonna take it. But knowing that as a player does not mean that Esri is that ready or quick on the draw at all. There was a lot to process through to get Esri to the point where he thought that was that was the thing he should do. In reality, probably came to that conclusion much faster than he should have. So yeah, there were concessions made as a player, to be like, we got to move this along and make the decision. It never in the moment, even the player can only process so much. So I don't think I ever considered thoroughly the idea that I was being presented an offer of remaining as a spirit in the campaign. Perhaps I processed that I was being offered the chance to let Esri move on. And yeah, so maybe you can answer whether or not that's something I missed or not.
It was not something I was considering in the moment. If it had come up of like Esri trying to negotiate a compromise, I'd have considered that. I've never run a campaign with a ghost character, but hey, I've run a lot of D&D campaigns. Maybe it's time. There's probably some rules for that. Maybe the reborn thing out of Van Richten's. I don't know. No, I'm assuming what this is referring to was Arondis at one point said, you have a long way to go on this path, where you said something about if you're going to be a ghost, you're going to haunt them. And she said something to the effect of, you have a long way to go on this path before you could do that by choice. And I meant that phrase as a reference to, well, proceed along the path of necromancy, and eventually, sure, you could just pick that. So yeah, you weren't missing something that I was offering. Had that come up, I'd have considered it. It wouldn't have been an automatic no for me to try and work out a way for a character who is dead to remain in the game without necessarily having a physical resurrection. It would just be a matter of working out what that means mechanically, and how to make that enough of a trade-off that you aren't just invincible at that point. So that I'd be interested in that.
So to go down this path a little further, then, we covered this in the show a little bit, that like he's not, death is not something he's afraid of. It's just largely the only thing he's had any sort of control over was staying alive. Like, that's it. And so he's taken a pretty hardline stance against trying to keep himself alive. And that's the control he has. He's going to take that. But it wasn't something he's afraid of. It's something he's very close to and intrigued by, especially just, the knowledge that in that world, it is clear that one does not just end when one dies, that there is more, something more going on. So there's a part of him, very large part of him, that once, okay, I've died, once that's happened, well, maybe the most logical thing to do is to go on. You know, as I said before, he didn't. There's nothing he's hearing that makes his life suddenly better or more desirable, and he could just move on to the next stage and go figure out what death is like,
Mm-hmm.
what actually is happening, what are there answers, are there further answers to gather. So it was a serious consideration for him whether or not, now that it's happened, okay, am I going to go back to fighting this again? uh, what's the benefit there? So there were definitely things that had to happen for him to be convinced. Certainly the deal or the requests, whatever she was offering, um, could have made up his mind in the other direction. If this was a forgotten prince situation, if she
Mm-hmm.
was trying to get him, uh, indenture him to her, to go back, that would have been a complete no from him.
Yeah.
There's no way. There's no way he's going back under some sort of obligation, uh, or at least not a formal one. She's
Right.
sort of obligated him to stuff in the sense that, okay, well, you did send me back. I should probably make an effort. But, um, yeah, if she had tried to bargain with him
Mm-hmm.
to own him in some way, no, done.
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't have even kept talking.
Right.
Also, do I want to say this? No, there was something. I mean, it was called out in the episode. I won't mention it now, but there is, because it'll probably come up again. But there was something else that happened very substantially in his mind that
Mm-hmm.
made him want to go back.
Yeah. Um. Yeah, I thought about, as we were talking, I was trying to think what would she do given the situation, and just the importance of the knowledge that there's a living bearer of the mark in Eberron, um, made it so that any kind of attempt to like manipulate you directly by, serve me and I'll return you to life, that sort of thing, would be excessively risky for her, because what if you say no? She has a lot to gain from you going back and very little to gain from you staying dead. So the usual, make a deal with some extraplanar entity for more life, didn't seem like the logical move for someone who's had thousands of years to think about this kind of situation. Uh,
Right.
so, I'm Spartacus offers another possibility. He says, or were you mining for lore or trying to figure out what was being offered or rolling up a new PC on the side but didn't feel inspired?
I definitely wasn't doing that, and I
Yeah,
don't have a backup character. I know some people do that. I don't do that. I've got backup ideas.
sure.
I come up with ideas all the time, but I don't generally build them out. Um,
What's at the top
Lore
of your
dump.
list right now?
Very very broadly speaking, an old character,
Mm-hmm.
someone who has missed the adventuring, the normal adventuring stage in their life, but it wants to make up for that. So
Cool.
inspired, Travis Willingham
Yeah.
played two old characters, is playing a second old character in a row on the current campaign, and it just got me thinking. I hadn't
Mm-hmm.
ever really considered that. I don't know exactly what like class or anything. I don't tend to start from those.
Sure.
So, um, but yeah. What lore dump? The only lore dump thing he that I like consciously did was the Sphinx. Like
Mm-hmm.
well, let me qualify that a little bit. The only thing that I thought was maybe slightly out of flow was, is there like, I wasn't sure, like, can we please get a hint about how finding the Sphinx, what's going on here? um Besides that, I mean, sure, Esri was asking for information because he's confused, and uh there's an extraordinary situation happening, so he's taking that opportunity. But so yeah, sort of, but mostly in character.
All right. Spartacus also asks, Philip, did you discuss this with RA during the cut, or just wrestle with the killing / resurrecting him on your own? In terms of the going for the kill thing, which I have never done that to a player. I have never had a player down, or I've never decided, okay, everything is trying to kill this character. It's never felt in a game I've been running narratively appropriate to try outright and kill a character. I did send assassins after a character one time in Mummy's Mask. I had assassins go after one of the characters on one occasion. But there was never really a point in that where that character was down and I went for the kill anyway. Usually a character goes down, they're not a threat anymore, and so whatever the opposition is moves on to fight other things. That's usually how I run it. Even with monsters that are particularly cruel or something like that. But given the context, I tried to signal what their intention was and what they were doing. And so it was mostly just I'm really nervous about whether I'm going to succeed, because once Esri's down, it's not hard to succeed. And obviously I did. Once Esri was dead, I did a little bit on from that pause, and this gets cut in the episode. Pause, and I told RA that I was going to, I had an idea of what we're going to do now. I decided what we were going to do now. And I asked if there were any mechanical changes or that kind of thing that he might like to make to Esri that could reflect this, the way that Eric did with Ari. Because that was not driven by me telling Eric, you need to make some changes. That was driven by Eric saying, I'd like to try this. And this is a good excuse for it. So I gave that offer just in case, because, sometimes you get a little ways into a character and then you feel like, I'd kind of like to rework this. And usually I'll just let a player do that. It doesn't bother me. But if there's a moment where it's narratively appropriate, that's handy. So that was the extent to which I discussed it with him. We had not discussed a conversation with Arandis, because I have a note in the back of my notebook that was on my Esri page that was Esri meets Arandis in death. And because that sounded interesting, but it wasn't they're going to Shea Tirias Tillei. I know there are Death Guard there, so let's kill Esri so that he can meet Arandis. It really was, the arrival of the Death Guard really was determined by randomness. And yet again, on a recorded D&D game that I'm involved in, random tables devolve into player death or character death. So random tables are evil. That's the way it is. But anyway, so yeah, that's the extent of discussion. There is a long pause that was long enough to not be a dramatic pause, which is why I edited it slightly, where I was psyching myself to actually do it and go for it. But and then
the cut mentioned, the cut known, I guess you mentioned it in the watch party, which is how they know, was 3 seconds long, 5 seconds maybe. It was that particular cut was who, actually, let me ask you this, who is it targeted at most, do you think? Because Colin and I were talking about this, and I was like, well, for you, Colin, it probably was least meant for you, because you have the least amount of social norm, that's not the right term, like table etiquette expectations coming into this, right? Like that's, so I assumed it was, but I'm wondering if it was targeted at me or Casey or Eric most, or if it wasn't, or maybe it wasn't, but
it was it was general. I think that um, I realize that having played with you all a lot, that I have an enormous amount of trust back and forth between us, that I'm not a jerk as a DM and that y'all aren't jerks as players. And so it probably wasn't necessary for me to make a comment about it or say anything in when we were recording, but it's been kind of a taboo for me to not, you don't dogpile on a player just because you don't kill players while they're down unless it will do something for the story. And so I felt like I needed to say something. It wasn't necessarily that I thought anyone was going to be upset, but I felt like I needed to just say, I know what I'm doing. It's going to be okay. Maybe it was for me. Yeah. So not specifically targeted, but yes, it was about to cross a line that I wouldn't normally.
As soon as you said it, I knew what you were referencing. Like, I didn't. Oh,
yeah,
that's what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Spartacus also asks, how many planes/times is Shea-Tyrios to lie in? Solanas and Eberron, but was Esri in Mabar? And Shade's Dream would be in Dalcor. So that's at least 4 material plus 3. The implication that Erandus gave to Esri was that Shea-Tyrios Tilai exists on many planes, that it is a nexus of some sorts. I don't want to give a fixed number of exactly which planes it's on, because I would need to contemplate the implications of that. In terms of where Esri would have been,
well, I mean, how many planes are there?
There are 13.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. In terms of Eberron cosmology, Esri would have been on Dolor, which is the plane where where dead spirits go, rather than on Mabar, which is the plane of unlife, which is where necromantic magic is drawn from. So Esri would have been in Dolor, not specifically in Mabar. So I guess, yeah. So yes, we've seen that it must exist in those 4 in different ways, but does it exist elsewhere? Probably, but it has not yet become relevant to the story. So I will not declare regarding that. But yes, there was some confusion in the watch party and maybe among the player characters. So just to clarify, what we have established is that Shea-Tyrios Tilai as a city exists simultaneously on several different planes of existence in a variously mirrored form. So we have a ruined city on Eberron. We have a memory of that city in the plane of dreams, Dalcor, and there's a sort of ghost of what the city looked like in Dolor, where Esri was, which is why it looked different. They're all the same place on different planes. So that's as straightforward as I was making it. If you still don't get it, it's okay. It's not, you don't have to understand the cosmology. It's okay. But that's what it is. Emily has some questions for you. Aside from Eberron, have you played in any other published D&D settings, 5e or otherwise, and which ones?
Majority of my time has been spent in Golarion, Pathfinder setting with 5e rules. So I guess that's not technically a published 5e setting. I don't know if there's a Golarion 5e anywhere.
Not really, no.
But so sort of played a little bit of Sword Coast. What is that called? Faerun? No, what's the actual?
Yeah. Forgotten Realms is the setting, but Faerun is the world. Yeah.
So a little bit there, not very much. I mean, if you were to like stack up all the times I've played, I've played almost all of my playtime in Golarion or Middle Earth, and then Eberron's creeping up there now. I think that's it. Haven't done any of the Yeah, even the Sword Coast stuff, very small. I'm trying to think of like what the other settings are. I guess I got the Magic the Gathering setting now. I haven't done that.
Oh, yeah. They don't have. I guess Ravenloft is kind of is its own setting. The Mist.
Is it not part of Faerun?
It's a separate set of demi-planes within the Mists, the Domains of Dread, and Barovia is one of those. So,
okay.
Kinda yes, kinda no. You can get to Barovia from, in theory, any plane. They're about to, or at least they're teasing that they're about to release a Spelljammer book, which is where you take a spaceship through the astral sea to visit different planes.
I guess I got the Critical Role. What is it called? Exandria.
Yeah.
Setting now. I haven't done any of that.
Yeah. What moment from the Lost episode are you most sad about no longer existing in the recorded show?
I'd have to go back and watch it. We do have we have everyone except Philip
right
recorded. Well, I don't know if we still do or not, but I think I still have the audio anyway of mine. I mostly just, it was just like the natural stuff that the character stuff that happens, we recreated a little bit of it there at the beginning of the episode that we actually got after it, and the recreated is always, it's just not quite as good just because it's not quite as natural. So I don't recall any particular specific moment. I mean, inside of the giant's hut, and I can't remember her name, but
Golranak.
Oh, yeah, okay, Golranak's hut. We had some interesting moments of like interaction while those of us that weren't really involved in the conversation directly and messing around in the background, kind of like nudging each other while the parents look away kind of thing. It's always a shame if you lose something like that. I mean, I guess most of our games aren't recorded, so it's always lost, but yeah, just a shame that technical issues come up.
Given the request that he marry and have children, what would Esri look for in a potential spouse/parent of his child?
It's, well, I won't speculate here because it may come up, we may explore that, but I will. I mean, you saw his reaction in the episode. It's like, I don't know if I have a good metaphor for this, but just the furthest thing from his consideration is even the idea of family is traumatizing to him, or not, or was traumatic to him. So I guess it's triggering for him. It's like, what, is there a good someone who almost drowned, who has a phobia of water? Like, is it too much to ask for you to join a swim team?
Yes.
And then,
yes, it is.
I mean, it probably, and then of course asking to track down your family, these things back to back. It's just the worst. It's the worst benign things. The thing that you would think for most people would be a benign ask is just kind of a terrible one for him. Exactly what he does with that, obviously we'll
see.
We gotta find out. I don't know.
This next one from Emily may not be one you can answer. It's certainly not something you and I have explored. Maybe you have some ideas, and maybe you do or do not want to share. But what were Esri's siblings like prior to Esri getting his mark, at least?
Same thing. I won't go into details here because that is a thing that will probably, or I guess potentially, be explored. I mean, we've said he had a family, a nuclear family that he was part of and well integrated into until the mark showed up. We know that. And things went awful from there. But so it nothing before the mark, and I think I can say this is like is specifically outstanding. There
Mm-hmm.
are generally outstanding things about his family and his community that we may, that may come up, but yeah, it's not he didn't have, at least in his conception, monsters for siblings
Yeah.
growing up.
And then Emily asks, for me, have I ever killed off a PC before Esri, and was it permanent, or was there a resurrection?
Do they not
I
know
have
about your
killed many
bag?
PCs. Yeah. Yeah, it's not in Reacher. I'd show it, but yes, my original dice bag that I used to keep my DMing dice in before I got a different one has the best upsell I've ever fallen for. Me, one of Eric had just killed, I think, one of my characters in a game, and so we went to a game store and we were looking at minis, and Eric was chatting with the owner about what had just happened in our game. And he was a real friendly guy. He said, "Oh, you know what you need? Every time in my game, every time one of the players dies, or the player characters dies, we have to give the DM one of these little skull beads for his bag." And he pulls up this little plastic bag of glow in the dark skull beads. And we bought it on the spot. Like, I bought it immediately. And so Eric and I have traded little skull beads every time we've killed one of our characters, and mine are strung on my old bag. I have killed a character belonging to everyone on the show except Colin. I have permanently done that. I've mentioned this before. I killed, in circumstances that I'm not satisfied with, one of RA's characters in our One Ring game, and not at all in an interesting or dramatic way. I've killed a couple of Casey's characters. One just by the encounter just getting entirely out of our hands. I killed her first character, who bled out in Pathfinder, which is real hard.
Yeah, that was a near TPK.
Yeah, it really was.
And it was really just dice. Like, it wasn't, we didn't do anything particularly bad. We just couldn't hit.
Yeah, the dice just turned on the whole thing. And then I killed and allowed for resurrection of Casey's first really long played character in our home game, who died twice and was resurrected in different forms both times. Yeah, she got killed by the Mind Flayer, but
okay, yeah,
managed.
The first time it was just a resurrection.
Yeah, and then the second time she died and was reincarnated. Yeah. So I have done that, that's yes, and I have on some occasion done it permanently. Sometimes with player request. Eric got tired of a character and wanted him to go out in a dramatic way, and so we arranged for a dramatic final stand for that character. Sometimes it's just been the dice. Sometimes it's been permanent. Sometimes there's been resurrection. So a mixture. I've had most of the experiences regarding PC death. So yes, I have, and it has always made me break out in a sweat, like every single time. I am usually sweating by the time that it actually gets there. It makes me very nervous. And then there's some questions from Laura. Laura asks, RA, having played with Philip a lot, did you suspect something like the Arandis conversation was about to happen, or were you not in the headspace to be thinking about any of that? There's several more questions, but we'll pause there.
No, I had no idea. I mean, you had briefly prepared us for, like, you had a plan or something, but I had no idea. Well, I don't know if it was even about my headspace. It was just that can go anywhere. So, and well, as Philip mentioned, I think since I actually have that question up, the next question is, what have your other characters' deaths been like? And I have only had the one, and it was in a setting where resurrection was not a thing, and so it wasn't like there was going to be anything. So my experience playing with Philip has not, I guess, at least for personal character deaths, has not prepared me. I have observed other characters coming back. Um, though I've also observed other characters disappearing entirely and us not dying, just going away and never coming back. So yeah, it can go a lot of directions, these D&D games.
Yeah, I had a player tell me with very short notice that he had decided he wasn't really interested in continuing playing his character and that he wanted to start a new character. And we were in a spot where it just made there's no way the character just leaves where we are. But we were in a place where weird magic played a role, and so what ended up being true, though they had no way of knowing this at the time, was that he was walking along and accidentally slipped through a passage into the Feywild and never came back. Yeah, so that's, yeah, we have just done character disappearances before. Laura asks, when making death saves, or in this case, I guess, before you even get to make a death save, are you the type to worry about your character or start planning a new one in your head?
I am not the one to start planning a new one in my head. I don't know about worried about. So one thing I've learned over my time playing is to try not to be too precious about your characters. My first super long running character, the first one I really ever made and was my most long running one, was very precious to me, and him dying without resolving his story would have upset me. Since then, I have mostly been able to go in with far less idea of who the character is and far less um nostalgia attached to them, far less importance to attached to them specifically. And I anyone I'm talking to that's new, I try to suggest that go the go in with an idea of your character and the things defined that you need to be defined, and let everything else flow from that. uh I think everyone, or close to everyone, starts, maybe not everyone, that's too much projection. I at least started with this idea, like, my character is this deep literary uh character, immense backstory, and all of these things they need to resolve. And you you run into the problem of, you've established your character as the protagonist
Mm-hmm.
in a story that's collaborative, and your character may not be the protagonist except for a little bit of time, and the things that you find interesting in your backstory may never come up, and maybe no one else finds them interesting. And really, all that second part should be okay. If no
Mm-hmm.
one finds your backstory interesting, that's fine. Your backstory should only be there to serve how your character acts now. I'm preaching. That's just my opinion, but it has helped. In the
Mm-hmm.
moment, I was thinking, well, this may be it for Esri, and I'll react to, whatever's coming up. I'll react to that as appropriately as I can. Uh, we'll deal with the after, and it could
Yeah.
have meant, a lot of things, and I've seen a lot of different ways to handle this. It could have meant an interim character. It could have meant um, not being on the show for a little while, as as Eric was, for, maybe there's reasons for that. But I said to Philip afterwards, that was a very fun death of a character. Like, it was really intense and really interesting, uh, and very very appropriate for the character, I felt.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad. I took, yes, it's something you worry about because it's not very easy to not care about your character at all. I tend to agree with RA, and it's easier to agree after you've built a few D&D characters, I think. And I tend to play pretty reckless with my characters, and be prepared for the reality that sometimes that doesn't pay off. And my character in RA's game has come very close to ending a couple of times, due to that recklessness. But yeah, you worry about it as a DM, and so hearing that it was fun even when your character died, that's always nice. So yes. Laura asks, Philip, did you have that scene planned out in case this ever happened? Did Esri do anything surprising with that conversation? Okay, and the sense in which I had that scene planned out was the sense I've mentioned. There is a note on my Esri page of Esri meets Arandis in death. That is the extent to which that scene was planned out. So in that sense, everything Esri said surprised me because I had no idea what Esri would say in that conversation. The things that Arandis said were largely made up because I had no idea of what the circumstances of Esri meets Arandis in death would be like, and so I was making up Arandis's offer in the moment. I knew I wanted Arandis to offer a way back for Esri, but that's really the extent of what I knew as the scene started. I had to work out why is Arandis here in death when she's also physically present in Eberron was something I was kind of feeling my way towards as the scene progressed. And I mean, part of the reason I'm not answering the Shaytirias Talai thing more clearly is Esri asks, why am I here? And my answer was, because you died in this place. But if Esri had died somewhere else, the same thing might have happened. And I would have had a different answer to that question. So I learned something to a degree about Shaytirias Talai in the scene. In terms of the Esri surprising, I feel like I know Esri pretty well. I feel like I've gotten to know these characters pretty well, and so the scene flowed pretty well. Esri was more polite when she brought up family than I think I expected him to be. I think I expected that to be an irritating question to him, and for him to be a little more open with the irritation. Maybe it was irritating, but in the moment there were other things on Esri's mind to compensate for that.
I mean, for him, it was the absurdity,
yeah,
of how do you express that is an awful thing to ask me to do. On the other hand, we're ghosts, and you're offering to resurrect me. I don't. that is a ridiculous situation to find oneself in. If you have any self-awareness, right? Like.
It was also, I think one of the things that was challenging for me there was sometimes with a character, I have a lot of thought as to how I'm going to personify them. Thora, I'd given a lot of thought as to who Thora is and how I was going to personify her. For our first episode, I'd spent a lot of time thinking about who Soren is, so that I could be Soren for a moment or two. I've spent a lot of time thinking about Tommel since Tommel became important. Arandis,
not the most time, I bet.
Right. Arandis, I figured I would probably wish she would eventually come up once we had once I had realized that I wanted Ari to have the Mark of Death, and once RA gave me Esri to have the Mark of Death, and once RA gave me permission to do that, I figured Arandis would come into it at some point. But I wasn't actually very sure whether I would ever need to roleplay her. And so her as a personality was something I had to kind of feel my way towards in the moment. And so one of the challenges was I pretty quickly established that at least this manifestation of her is very somber, but RA was making me laugh. Like RA, like the can we make it scary? Like that just that tickled me. And so trying to react as her, wanting very much to say yes to that question without giggling was a challenge to play her the way I was starting to envision her, while still very much enjoying the silliness of some of it. So
that also
not very
flowed
well
directly from what I said. The absurdity of the situation. Like, well, don't know how many times I'm gonna get to do this. I mean, I guess it sounds like Arandis has done it a lot, so maybe the novelty will wear off, but you know, maybe this is the only time.
Yeah. Since the episode, I have figured out exactly what was going on with Arandis, why she was there, why she was able to do this. I now know exactly what all of the answers were, and that's a lot of, speaking to the DM side of what RA was saying about your character and not overdoing your character. The temptation for new DMs, and I was very much into this, is to like deep plan everything about your world. And some DMs do that, and it works great for them. I don't know if Matt Mercer is just a really good improvisationalist. He certainly is a really good improvisationalist. I don't know if he is that kind of really deep planner, but he's also just really good. For me, that tends to make me get rigid in terms of how the story is going to go. I've got all this stuff, so you've got to see it. So lighter planning, being a little more fluid in the way that you plan, has always worked better for me. And so there are a lot of times where when I'm running a game, I will discover something about the world and I'll use the space between sessions to figure out what. So yeah, that's
yeah.
my
well,
my
I had to
DMing
say
side of
something.
that.
I said
Yeah.
that. What are the implications of that?
Right. I'm not going to
No,
shout.
I made up a
this.
planet on the fly.
Right. Wonder what's there.
Done that a few times.
Right. I'm not going to shout this, but Laura asks, Esri can float now? She asks it in all caps. Okay, a better way to phrase that. A better way to phrase that is anything about Esri's mechanics changing? If you want to share, of course.
Yeah, no. Only that it was his mark. His mark expanded, which we talked about at the end. So per our rules, our house rules, there are mechanical changes based on that, but nothing intrinsic to the interaction, or I shouldn't say intrinsic. Nothing intentional from the interaction, as we covered earlier. He's him. As far as actually, I should say this. As far as I know, nothing we've discussed.
You are the first time where I have adjusted a non-official spell to apply to your mark for the new. So I guess we haven't necessarily covered this. All the other players, when their marks expand, they pick a mark of an appropriate level. Since Esri has the mark of death, when I pitched it to RAs, I asked him, pick a spell. Yes. When I pitched it to RA, what would you think if your mark is not what you think it is, which would require me to have control over what spells you get so that I can get them into the right theme? And he said yes. So I have tended to give Esri spells that are a level above what he would normally get at that level of the mark, but I get to pick them is kind of the trade-off in my head. So for this one, I found an old spell and updated it to 5th edition because it was the right theme, whereas I didn't feel like there was a good necromancy spell of the appropriate theme. It's actually really
Yeah.
tricky with the mark of death, because the true marks are meant to be not primarily destructive in nature. And so the necromancy spell list, finding spells that aren't direct harm, isn't actually very easy.
Right. It is interesting that with the vastness of published D&D content, the spell list is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing how it's still hard to find just the right thing for
Mm-hmm.
you. I mean, I guess that's what you deal with when you're dealing with magic. Um, it's,
Yeah.
it can be anything you want, and so you want it to be.
I mean, I guess that's the argument for systems with a more vague magic system, where it's, you have an attack spell, tell me what its flavor is.
Right.
Because that's the argument for that. But yeah. And then Laura's last question for both of us. What is your favorite story about a character coming back to life? Movie, book, video game, anything?
Khyber Shards.
Khyber Shards. Nice.
I generally hate it. In
Yeah.
in different kinds of fiction, it exists in D&D because people want to maintain their characters. Like, it's the only that's what it's there for, mechanically. Right. In other fictions, usually I'm like, I think of it as a sign of laziness.
Mm-hmm.
Not always, but even like well, spoiler alert, I guess, for all of this, but it's statute, or the time frame is passed for it, though. I mean, Gandalf coming back,
Sure.
that whole thing. Also, just kind of, it always feels cheap to me. Time travel as well always feels just a little bit cheap, or a lot cheap, depending on how it's done. I'm just
Amnesia.
If you have
So I feel about Amnesia.
Oh yeah.
Same thing. It just feels, why? Come on. Not that it hasn't been done well, but that's
right.
That's usually my reaction to Amnesia as a plot device. I tend to agree. I don't love character resurrection. I'm not going to argue with you about Gandalf, although I want to. But probably the one that I think really feels good, that I really like, in comics. This happens all the time in comics, and is often some of the worst offenders in terms of the quality of return. I mean, Captain America dies in the Civil War series and then is brought back to life because we learned that the bullet he was shot with actually put him into temporal stasis. Anyway, but one where I think it is done very well is the character of Thor. Thor dies during, I want to say, the Avengers Disassembled series back in the very early 2000s, and then returns after the events of Civil War, and it's not handled as anything like, there's no MacGuffin to it. This is Norse mythology. Norse mythology and mythology in general is all about death and rebirth and cycles. And so, of course, Thor died, and gradually he's reformed. And so a lot of that plot is Thor coming back into his own and into his own existence, and being able to try and restart the gods after Ragnarok has essentially happened. And so it's a fun melding of someone who clearly thought a lot about Norse mythology and the implications of that being a reality in the Marvel universe. So I think that's very, very well done. It's the Straczynski run of Thor from like 2007, 2008 or something like that, if you are interested in comics. That's definitely one of my top ones.
Well, and to be clear earlier, I mean, Lord of the Rings is one of the better examples I can think
Sure.
of. Um, yeah, I'm having trouble coming up with any that I felt like were
It does often
really
feel like,
great.
oops, I wish I hadn't done that. Like
Yeah,
it is very
like
hard to find examples where it feels like I knew I was going to do this the whole time and I did it all very deliberately. It usually does feel like, ah, I painted myself into a corner here.
need that character back.
Right.
Or in the world of comics, you know what would sell well? Killing
Right.
off a massively popular character. Oh, you know what sells better? Continuing to have that character.
Yeah. Yeah. So it becomes, obviously it becomes a trope in comics, and gets more and more ridiculous the less supernatural the character is. You know, Thor coming back, all right, sure, to the degree that you accept Thor as a god. Batman coming back, what?
Right. Yes,
So,
the least supernatural.
I guess the Marvel equivalent is Hawkeye. Hawkeye dies very dramatically in the comics and then is resurrected by Scarlet Witch, um, who at least has an excuse, being that she can just change reality. So, not that that's a great answer. So I guess our answer is we don't very much like it in regular fiction.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know if Jon Snow actually comes back to life in the
That's true.
books
That's true.
because we may never get another book.
Right.
And that being said, I can't say it's my favorite because I don't know that we'll ever finish it. Potentially, it could have been, and so here, yeah. Let me say, because you said I know I would do this the whole time, and they've been setting it up for in every book.
Mm-hmm.
They've set up the prophecy of Azor Ahai, and like it's very much in place for him to potentially come back, and so in that case it could be good, because it was this whole long setup for
Yeah, it pays
someone
it
to
off.
be resurrected,
Right.
and others in the story have come back from the dead already. There's already a couple um, less impactful but established resurrections. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe that one. Maybe, I don't know. Ask me when I'm 80, and we'll
My
see if we actually know what the end of the story is.
my general question when I'm considering this sort of thing in fiction is, what is the cost of it? So you look at, to stay with Song of Ice and Fire, you look at, say, Beric Dondarrion. He's been brought back several times, but it's not been good for him. Like every time he comes back, he's not quite so much what he was before. And so that at least feels better to me than it feels less like man, I wish I had that character with me still. So
Yeah, and someone pointed out, this is a tangent now. Now we're just chatting, but it was pointed out to me recently in a video. I guess not to me, but it was I had it pointed out, or I noticed it for the first time, that magic is in Song of Ice and Fire. Anytime magic is used, it's something bad has happened. Like is going on. Like there's never there's never just like cleric healing magic and everyone's happy in that. It's like it's always dark.
Yeah, that's true.
I've not put that together yet.
Yeah, that is interesting. Anyway, there are our thoughts on death and resurrection in fiction as a whole. And that's all of our questions. So we'll wrap this up. Thank you all so much for the many questions that we got and for the delightful response that we've had to this very, very dramatic episode. We really appreciate it. If you'd like to get in touch with us, all of our contact info for our social media is in the description down below, including a link to our Discord where we tend to get most of our questions from. You can ask questions in the comments, but we have channels for it over on our Discord. And new episodes of Khyber Shards will drop every Monday. New episodes of Khyber Shards Answers drop every Friday. And until next time, thanks for rolling with us.